Yeah, hi. Realised it's been about 5 months since doing kind of any updates for this hot rod, which is really annoying because I haven't took much content in between. It's just a case of I've been trying to crack on, loads of stuff going on and whatnot. So this video is a bit backwards, forwards. You'll see me in several stages of homelessness. I'm supporting quite a good look at the minute with holes in kind of this hoodie. I mean, to be fair, I was hoodie every day for 5 months and been wilding near it, painting and whatnot. Same with the jeans and trainers. I just have kind of a garage outfit so I don't bring junk into the house. So yeah, basically we got quite far with it. I'm going to show you the chassis. The chassis is pretty much all done. It's just a bit of metal work now to do on this cab. So you may see me with a bit of a hairy beard, you may not. It's a mishmash, like I say. But yeah, I'm going to go through a bit of everything that I've kind of done over the last 5 months. Hey. Basically, at the minute, it's sort of semi-rolling. Obviously, the rear's all rolling and connected up. The axle's all connected. There's no prop at the minute, obviously. The front end is slightly higher than it should be. It's just because there's no kind of nothing attached to this wheel. It's just chocked under the cross member. So it's very slightly higher. So the front should drop down probably, I think it's about 1 inch. And then we get a nice 3-degree rake, as explained previously. Now, that 3-degree rake's been a right pain in my backside, but it's done now, so it should look pretty cool once it's done. Should give the truck a bit of a stance. So yeah, I'll start from the rear. The rear is pretty much done. I'm waiting at the minute for a spoiler. Now, I wouldn't normally have a spoiler on anything because I class it as a Goldie mod. And I explained that there's a chap that we used to know called Goldie that had a Ford Focus. This is going back years ago, like about 2002 time, when neons and things like that weren't really that cool. So yeah, he put all these awful mods on and we used to just sell it as a Goldie mod. So yeah, kind of a big spoiler on the back of this will be a Goldie mod, but there's a reason for it. So thinking like an F1 style spoiler, I've got to work out the height. It's either going to be kind of back here, quite low, or quite high. I've got to wait for the spoiler to turn up to kind of decide where that is. The reason in doing that is to visually make this wheel more central. So I'm putting something further out here to centralise that wheel. Now the reason being is I worked out all the kind of the engine length, which determined where the front kind of cross frame was going to be in the front wheel, and then the wheelbase needed to work back off of that. So obviously by placing that there, I knew where the cab needed to be because it needed to be as close to the engine as possible with a bit of room, which then brought me to the back. And then for it to look right, it would have looked weird if the wheel was kind of here. So for it to look right, it was here, and then it should have been a 5-foot bed on the back. Now I've got a good friend that allowed me to use his workshop bender, big sheet metal folder, but annoyingly it's only 4 foot. Now he did say I would like do it in 2 halves, but the last thing I kind of wanted was a kind of a butt join or a lapsed join, because I didn't think it would look quite right. So I've gone with a 4-foot bed. I've extended it as far kind of forward as possible, but it's only kind of like 2 inches over 4 foot. So it's kind of a bit short with the back than I would like it to be. It wouldn't have been a problem if it's short at the front and longer at the back in 4 foot, but obviously I could space the whole bed back because it would just look odd. So it's kind of where we're at. It's kind of dumpy. It goes in obviously a UK garage really nicely, because it's probably not that much bigger than probably my Lupo, to be honest. It's probably a bit longer than a Lupo, but it's very, very kind of small, kind of cute hot rod. So yeah, once I've got something up here, that will kind of visually centerise that axle, it'll look fine. So that's going to be done with that. All this bed is going to be open, so you can see all the tubular work, the prop hoop, obviously the polished up beer keg. I'm not going to put a bed on it. because I kind of think it will just destroy the look. Now the paint I've decided on is going to be Raptor, it's going to be a textured Raptor, so it's all going to be matte black with that real aggressive look. And yeah, it should look pretty cool, should look race style. These are obviously wheels going on it. I've got some bracing to do for, they're quite thin panels at the minute. Obviously the whole point was to do it race style and to do it lightweight. So I've got some bracing panels to go on there, just to square all the kind of lower bits, because at the minute it's on there solid, it's just obviously the panel work's got nothing to go back in the axle, but I am currently making something for that. So the rear end's done, obviously this is in properly, if anyone's thinking that looks a bit weird in the video. Interior's done, all ready to go. I've got obviously the bucket seat in, all the door bars are done. Let's see if we can open it. Don't know if you can see in the video, but yeah, all the door bars are done. Gearbox tunnel. I'm now, obviously, because I'm using a Vito 6-speed manual gearbox, the dash mounted the gear stick in the Vito van, so it is going to have a dash mount gear stick. But in all honesty, it works really well in there because the space is so tight. So we've got the gear sticks about here somewhere. Obviously, steering wheel, hydraulic handbrake. It's going to be the only handbrake on it, just because hydraulic's cool. So that's all mounted in. Just going to jar that a little bit for the time being. Obviously, again, there's loads of metal work needs doing on the cab. Going on to the front. Now, the front bar work here is obviously the front's got to go lower, but the bar work is kind of parallel fairly with the frame. But obviously, it's CDS, so there may be like a small degree here or there. But once it's all kind of together, you're not going to kind of see anything. But yeah, it's all kind of removable, this front section. So there's some bolts through here, proper roll cage bits. This is where it ties into obviously the triangle of the cage. So unbolts there, unbolts at the front here, and unbolts from the very front cross member. That all comes away to be able to work on the engine. There's going to be some pipes that come out here for the oil cooler. There's going to be stainless pipe here for the intake from the intercooler, and there's another pipe, I think, yeah, there's a water pipe or an oil pipe, can't quite remember, there's an additional pipe. It would be water, obviously, yeah, it would be water. That's going to come out there, so there's going to be loads of pipe work stuff going on here. And that was originally where the battery was going to go, but that's now kind of hidden, where you can see these spot welds here. There's an Optima red top battery sat there. So yeah, kind of this is how it is. The reason for this top bar work as it is because that exhaust can be flipped, can be clocked to point at the floor, and we can get a bonnet made very easily by rolling some sheet steel over the top and just potentially wiring some tabs on the top of this to have a bonnet. Then it can be used all year round. So if I wasn't going to do that, visually I think it would look better if this grille was as it was and then the bar work came down and went into the cage somewhere lower. But you've kind of then got the problem with the pedal box because of how tight it is. I don't know if you would actually be able to do that or not. But yeah, again, the reason why the bar work's quite high on this is to be able to give the opportunity to put a bonnet on if I needed it in the future. But personally, I think I'm going to have it about a year. I'm going to do a few shows in it, going to do a big dirty burnout video, that has to be done. And then yeah, it'll probably be up for sale because I have got something I'm working on for myself. It's going to be time to give it a first start soon. Just going to explain, because I struggled with remembering from the last one of how to do the fuel system on this. Obviously the first start is always a bit kind of bum twitchy because obviously I've had a fuel pump off, took an electronic fuel pump off, put a manual one on. Obviously by doing that I've got to mess around with timing because it sits slightly different. There's like degrees backwards, degrees forwards. It's a bit of a pain. Obviously you get kind of the instructions on your pump. So you'll have like a little tab that will tell you where the timing's got to be, but obviously it's still down to me to get it in the right place. And I don't trust myself at best times. So yeah, I'm going to do a first start in a minute. Obviously, with it being a diesel and having a pump off, you'll have no fuel in the pump, you'll have no fuel in the line, so it's a case of you've got to bleed the air through. But yeah, to explain the fuel system for anyone that's wondering, because the om606 is kind of, there's a bit of information here, a bit of information there, people claiming this, people claiming that. I'm not going to claim anything, I'm just going to say how I've done it. So usually there's a lift pump, a mechanical lift pump, like a diaphragm that kind of sucks on the side of these manual pumps. I've personally removed that just because I've had one go in the past and it just left me stranded. It wasn't on a 606, it was on an older car, but still the kind of thing in my head, I kind of don't want that, and I want to flow as much fuel through as possible. So I've gone for an electronic setup, which also means bleeding's quite a lot easier. And if any kind of air ever travels back, it's obviously going to be able to, when you turn it on, it's going to get the pressure there pretty much instantly with an electric pump, whereas with a diaphragm one, you're going to be kind of turning the engine over and over. So I've got a modified beer keg, stainless steel keg, with the feed and return, both in the bottom. Now obviously some people want to return into the top, which you can do, it's just I kind of didn't want it on the show, so it's through the bottom. The feed goes directly out of this keg into a pre-filter, which is kind of cylinder tube. Now it's got a mesh in it. What that does is stops any junk that comes out of the nozzle of the fuel thing with the fuel pump. If you get, because you get junk out of that, it'll go into there and it'll stop it before it hits the electronic fuel pump. Now, the electronic fuel pump I'm using is a Bosch 044, which usually runs like 4 or 5 bar pressure and a lot of fuel. We're going to turn the pressure down on that pump, but still have the high flow of fuel. So that'll be good for, obviously, if you're messing around with a turbo, putting more boost through it, you're going to obviously want more fuel to match it. So that's kind of where we're going with that. So we go from the Bosch 044 out, and then to here on the chassis, there's a secondary filter. Now that's a more of a finer filter, which will take kind of the last bits of rubbish out the diesel. And obviously it's on the frame here because I wanted it kind of hidden, but I also wanted it accessible. So that's one of them spinny off, spinny on type ones. You know what I want about. From there it goes to the pump feed, so obviously it's filtered nicely into the pump. Then it comes out of the pump as a return, which is on the back. So the feed is on the front, this side of the pump. Banjo fitting, we removed obviously the Mercedes filter setup because they're prone to getting air in the lines and problems with those. Again, other people have perfectly fine. I'm not saying to remove the Mercedes stuff. Keep it on there if you want. I'm just explaining how mine's done. So mine is literally to banjo straight to the pump. So you want a banjo in. 10mm feed, then out it's a 10mm again, but instead of it going straight back to the tank, you've got a fuel pressure regulator in between, and it's an adjustable one just because they're cheap and cheerful. And I'll explain now that the fuel return goes from the back of the pump into the side of the fuel, or the back, depends how you mount it, but basically the kind of the top one of the fittings of the fuel pressure regulator, and then out of the bottom, which is always the case, goes back to the tank. Now the bottom one, that's where you want to put in after the fuel pressure regulator, so the bit of pipe between the return to the tank and the bottom of the fuel pressure regulator, that's where you want to tee in your injector return. People are teeing it in before then and then wondering why the chain at the top, where obviously because of petrol you would have the spark plugs, where kind of that your injectors sit, they fill with diesel really quickly if you put it the wrong side of the fuel pressure regulator. And the reason being is because that's a pressurised side, so you want to make sure that you tee in after that. So you don't need to bring a separate return back, so you don't need 2 returns to go back to the tank, which is what a lot of people tend to be advising. There's quite a lot of American people are saying to do that, and I'm not 100% sure why, whether it's to do with the heat or something, God knows. Just return it after the fuel pressure regulator, you won't have the pressure and it runs nicely. So that's kind of how you do that. With it being an adjustable fuel reg, there's also a kind of vacuum thing which would normally plumb up to your inlet, which means obviously when you go for full boost on like a petrol for instance, it will demand, obviously the pressure of the inlet will then kind of make your fuel system kind of compensate, which will obviously increase in the pressure. It's going to obviously want more fuel, so it sucks more fuel, moves the diaphragm, does all its magic-y stuff. But with it being on this, you don't want that. You just want it to be a steady, like 1 bar, 1.5 bar, 2 bar, whatever kind of your pump says it needs to be. In my case, I've got a diesel mech and pump and smoke to Goran, and sorry if that's not pronounced right. it's about 1.5 bar, so mine's sat at that, and you want that constantly. So the bit that kind of comes off that fuel pressure regulator, I just vent it to air. You don't want that to change, you just want it to sit at 1.5 bar throughout the rev range. So that's how it is. We're going to try it now. I'm going to bleed it up. Obviously it'll be a bit of a choo-choo train because I'm trying to get slacking off all the nuts here to get kind of air out, slacking it at the top. It'll idle funny, it'll idle like it's cammed. And then hopefully it will start to sound like one of these 2JZ diesel engines. So fingers crossed.